The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Happy Mailbag Day, everybody. Happy Mailbag Day. Trying to get into this thing with a nice measure of enthusiasm. Woo! Yes, Mailbag Day. It's Wednesday, which means I am solo here on Fantasy NBA Today. I am Dan Bespris, and it also means that we're taking questions on the podcast, something we're going to be doing a couple of times here leading up to NBA opening night, although I do have some little tidbits I'd like to get into that are unrelated to that. Thanks for listening, folks. Really cool stuff here on the podcast over the last couple of weeks. We set our record, by the way, for listens in August. Was able to go back and check that out, compare it to previous years. And indeed, we did set a new high mark. In fact, we also had our most listened to episode in the month of August. And I'm hoping we can do the same for the month of September. That means there are more of you than in seasons past. And for that, I am eternally grateful. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Bespris. You can, of course, check out Hoopball, hoop-ball.com, or at hoopballfantasy for all of your hooping and balling needs. Of course, you've got the draft guide for sale. I know I've been doing some pretty hard promo on that this week, but you're going to have to deal with it because it's one of only two things we sell at Hoopball. We sell the draft guide and we sell the season premium package. So when we have something for sale, which is not all that common, we'd like you to at least check it out. It's what powers the engine here. It's what allows us to do all these free things, these free podcasts, these free articles, so many things at Hoopball. We're just doling out because, damn it, we love fantasy basketball and we love talking about it, that we do have to sell a thing every once in a while, try to make sure that we can pay a couple of the bills. So if you have a moment, please do head to hoop-ball.com. The dash is not a word. It is an actual dash. It's a hyphen on your keyboard, your QWERTY keyboard. Hoop-ball.com. The draft guide is a giant graphic right there on the homepage. You can check it out from there. You can see a preview of all the things involved in it, player profiles, ADPs, head-to-head reports, roto reports. The list literally is too long for me to do on this podcast without boring the crap out of you, unless you bought it, in which case you're probably pretty stoked about the whole thing. And, of course, the most important thing related to the draft guide, October 1, the Brewski 150 becomes a part of the draft guide. If you buy the draft guide now for $13.99, you get the B150 for free on October 1st. If you bought the draft guide back when it was $9.99, you still get the B150 for free. So I suggest you continue to get the draft guide before the price keeps going up. Draft guide, get it. You can thank me later. And when I say later, I mean October 2nd, after you have a chance to read the B150. It's awesome this year. It's awesome every year. I've seen it now. I haven't seen all the descriptions, by the way. I've seen the best of the best. I've seen the Hoop Ball 6. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys are going to be stoked. You guys are going to be stoked. I was stoked because there's a guy that I put a decent number of chips on last year towards the end of the season. Digging it. It's going to help me in my keeper league going forward. So that's on October the 1. Big day. Do also want to mention, by the way, for those of you that have very early drafts, there's a B150 Ultra early release on a September 20th. That is an additional fee. You can check that out at hoop-ball.com as well. If you like the podcast, you've been listening over the last week or two, those of you that are new to the show, please take a moment to rate and review us. Love those 5-star ratings. They help us grow. They help us build our way up the iTunes leaderboards. And most importantly, and I finally did a little bit of reading on this, subscriptions. I know. Freaked me out too. When there are new subscribers to a show, that's how you move up the easy-to-find leaderboard, the hot leaderboard. Have you guys heard, I mean, you've probably heard of troll farms. That's a thing that everybody's talking about these days, or maybe not everybody. But there are farms, podcasts by farms of people to subscribe and then unsubscribe to their show every single day. So they stay on that most listened to list. It's pretty whack. And it sucks for those of us that don't do that. So we need you real human being, real live people to go and subscribe to the podcast, and that's how we'll be able to continue to grow. So it's Mailbag Day, everybody. Got that other stuff in the books. Thanks to everyone again for tuning in. Thanks to those that are rating and reviewing, and so on and so forth. We're taking questions today. Had a chance to send out a tweet last night. Again, that's at @DanBespers, if you'd like to, get involved for the next time around. Asking you guys to submit some questions for this Wednesday podcast, and you delivered. One of the questions actually even gave us an idea for the topic on tomorrow's show. I'll tell you about that towards the end of the podcast. Question number 1. We're going to go through some of these things mostly chronologically, although there will be a couple of ones that we most likely leave out. Just can't get to all of them. Time is of the essence. The ones that get left out are usually the ones that are a little bit more team-specific or sometimes even player-specific. I don't want to get into exact rankings of everybody on the list here. It's great and all, but to be perfectly honest with you guys, I don't, and we've talked about this a million times on the pod, I have less a list and more a series of buckets. That is to say, instead of, for me, I find that timing-wise, I could take 250 guys in the NBA and try to line them up one after the other, but you get to a certain point where the difference between guys is either negligible or you just feel like a lot of guys are sort of all belonging in the same boat, or what I call buckets. These buckets I was talking about. So, there's like a top 5 bucket, and then there's like maybe it's more like a top 2 or 3, and then there's like a next 6, and then there's like a next 15, and then there's a next 20. So there's like 6 or 7 buckets all told, where it's probably a couple more than that if you really wanted to. I think as I get into organizing, I'm a pretty anal fellow when it comes to stuff like this. So you probably have 8, 9, 10 buckets maybe, as opposed to like 150 to 200 individual players. And that's why I don't feel like it's actually all that worthwhile for us to say, okay, well, where do you rank these guys on your own list? Some of these guys, they're just all in the same bucket. So it's like, listen, I think we've had questions in the past that's like, what do you think about Chris Middleton or someone else I forget on the list who was right next to Chris Middleton? And I'm like, look, there's a reason these guys are right next to one another. They're both good, right? So there's a bucket phenomenon for me. And then you look at ADPs, and then you decide who you're taking where. That's what it really boils down to. You make sure you get the guy that's the better value. If you think 2 guys are basically the same player and you can get one later than the other, the one that you can get later is the better value, and that's how you should be basically prepping for your draft. If you want to do it, I call that like the medium effort manner. Maximum effort is, of course, making the full list, but not all of us can do that. Some of us have to take a little bit of corner cutting. But if you can predict what everybody else in your league is going to do, and there are times where I feel like I'm fully clairvoyant, you're set. Question number 1. Stuart on Twitter, @OotsSuperStew. Do you draft by need to balance out the categories, or do you pick the best available talent in Roto? That's a really good question, Stuart. It has to be a little bit of a balance of both. As with many things in life, there is a little bit of gray area. I am a strong proponent of best player available, but if you're into the 3rd round and the best player available continues to be at one position where suddenly now your team is just set to destroy in free throw percentage, 3-pointers, and assists, you might actually want to consider getting sort of, not necessarily a different position on the floor, but a guy that does excel in a slightly different spot. You have to find a way in a Roto League to not be a complete disaster. And generally, late in the draft, the guys that you're finding are good at 1 or 2 statistical categories, and that's a difficult thing to use if you're trying to make up ground. Very difficult thing to use. If you get to the 9th, 10th round and you realize you have no blocks on your team, you're going to be stuck taking a guy who can block a couple of shots, but will also tank some other category on your club. So for me, it's most often best player available, and frankly, in a lot of situations, in, I would say, the vast majority of drafts that I've done, it tends to sort of balance itself out a little bit. That is to say, the best player available generally doesn't end up being a point guard for 3 rounds in a row. Someone else is going to take a point guard. You're going to find a situation where maybe you really like a point guard and there's another dude that's the same, that's right next to them, and you'll take the wing or you'll take the center. But this is sort of in conjunction. This question, I think, ties in nicely with, do you draft based on position? And for that, my answer is also mostly no, but it does tend to sort of work itself out. It just does. You do have to be cognizant of it. You do have to make sure that you're not completely avoiding certain things, but I don't think that you have to be overly concerned with it in, say, the first 2 rounds. As you get to the 3rd and the 4th, if you realize you've totally missed out on a couple of key statistical categories, you might want to shore them up a little bit. Question number 2 from Jaime, or Jamie. Not sure the pronunciation. Apologies if I got that wrong. In the last few rounds, are you looking to shore up categories you need help with, such as specialists, or are you looking for guys who can smash their ADP? This is a really good series of questions. I start to think maybe these two guys are working with one another. I don't think that they are, but it's a great back-to-back here. And the answer, this one, is less gray for me. This is, for me, and I don't think that everybody agrees with this, but for me, I am looking for guys that will dominate their ADP. Absolutely smash it. Guys that come in, you're looking for guys that you can draft at 125. That'll be a top 80 value on the year. That type of stuff. Those are game changers, man. Those are the guys that, especially if they get off to like a hot start, or they have a couple of really strong weeks mixed in, you could package them with someone that you drafted earlier and turn them into an even better draft pick. Like, let's say you drafted, let's use last year. Let's say you drafted Thad Young. He was one of the best bunch last season. Let's say you drafted Thad Young at like $1.25 in your thing. So that's like an 11th round pick or a 13th round pick, depending on the size of your league. Say you took him at 125. Thad Young comes out of the gates. He's posting top 50 value. Now, you know that he's more of a top 75 kind of guy. And obviously, he ended up exceeding that last year because of strong play all year, and durability came into play as well. But that's the kind of guy that you could package with someone you drafted, say, in the top 50 and try to turn him into like a top 25, top 30 kind of guy. Because you know how I feel about basically the entire season. The whole season is just a struggle to try to turn some of your guys into slightly better guys and thin out your team in the process. For me, I love picking up guys off the waiver wire. I love going crazy with them. And I love to have open spaces on my roster. And that's just one way to do it. You just keep packaging guys. Even if you're giving away, frankly, slightly more than you're getting back, I always believe that I can fill that empty roster spot with somebody just as good as the guy I sent out. Might not always be the case, and in deeper leagues, it almost definitely isn't. Another reason to look for guys late in the draft that can smash their ADP is specialists are always out there. They're always out there, guys. If you're looking to fill just a couple of little holes on your team late in a draft, don't. Oh, I got to the 11th round of my fantasy draft and I felt like I could have been a little better at 3-pointers. That's just not the time to worry about it. Go look for a guy that might come blasting out of the gates and just crush everybody. And if you really feel like, you don't know how your guys are going to do necessarily. Guys do different things on a year-to-year basis. If it's really obvious, then fine. Maybe that is a time to do it. But I don't think that any of us can be that certain of where a category might be just lacking enough where a specialist is going to make all the difference. So in that instance, You can get into the season, and a month into the year, if you do realize, oh, you know what, I could use a little boost in three-pointers, you go just pick up some guy who's decent at three-pointers, throw him into your lineup for 3 or 4 games. CJ Miles was that guy for many, many years. You just pick him up for 2 weeks, see if you can milk 20 three-pointers out of him, and then go back about your business. So yes, end of the draft. Take a risk, man. Go nuts. Go nuts. That's your opportunity, because if they don't pan out, you can just cast them off into the ocean. No harm done. VP. I knew you'd get a question in there, VP. Longtime listener of the show. Big-time hoopball guy. Always appreciate him checking in things out. How bad is dealing with 3 2-game weeks for the Denver Nuggets before Christmas? Do you stay away from teams with that many 2-game weeks? Maybe limit players from Denver to 2 or even 1 per fantasy team? My answer is, meh, not really. And I know this question is basically geared towards head-to-head because, in Roto, ultimately, the number of games even out. All the teams play 82, so you don't have to worry about that too much. In a head-to-head situation, I'd be much more concerned about that if you were looking at playoff schedule as opposed to first 2-month schedule. First of all, you can overcome it. If you have one guy on your team, very easily you can overcome that because the way they've stretched the schedule out here, the odds are you're going to be playing against an opponent who probably has one guy with a crummy schedule week also. I don't know that I would ever really look to take 3 guys on the same team in a head-to-head situation, but it's also, okay, so I guess you might end up with it. It seems very difficult to end up in that spot. 2 players, no, I don't think I'd limit that either because you're talking about a situation where sometimes one of those guys gets hurt, the other one actually sees a slight bump in value. It's almost like a weird self-handcuffing that occurs having a couple of guys on the same team. In terms of scheduling-wise, yeah, it does hurt you a little bit in head-to-head, but I think you're talking about a time of year in particular where your opponents are probably just kind of setting it and forgetting it as well. Guys are going to get hurt midweek. You might end up with a Denver team where those couple of guys, your 2 Denver Nuggets, whoever they might be, you have like Gary Harris and Paul Millsap on your team. If they're both healthy and they play their 2 games that week, that might balance out with an opponent who has a guy get hurt and play one of his 4 games. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's very easy to overcome a couple of weeks. In this case, it's 3 weeks where you're looking at a guy with not a great schedule. And then the schedule obviously is better for a team like that in other situations. So it should balance out. You should be able to beat the hell out of teams when Denver has bigger weeks. And then you just look for, in those 2-game weeks, here's what I would do. I'd probably do a little streaming. I'd try to turn my last 1 or 2 roster spots in from a combined 6 games that week to, a combined 9 games that week, something like that. So you can actually kind of make up the ground a little bit. It's something that I would often do more, I would say, religiously in head-to-head playoffs, where you try to turn all of your roster spots into 7-game weeks. It's obviously not doable, but let's say you have a 4 roster move week, and when your 2-game weeks are coming up. You make a move right before that week begins. You try to get a guy who's playing, say, Monday and Tuesday. Maybe another of your guys is playing Monday and Wednesday. You make some moves Wednesday and Thursday. You make some moves Saturday. So you turn those last 2 roster streaming slots into 4 to 6 games apiece. And then your 2 Denver guys playing 4 total games really doesn't seem to hurt you all that much. Easy peasy. Drew Holiday's floor is the next question. That's from J-Ball. I would say still pretty low. Very high ceiling, very low floor, because we've seen both. And I don't want to spend too much time on this question, but just to say, you go back 2 seasons to when Drew Holiday ended up doing a lot of ball handling, and that was really clunky. And then last year, when Rondo did a lot of the ball handling, things went a lot better for him. He puts up good defensive stats regardless, but that assist-to-turnover ratio and some of the other stuff that goes with it, they can fall out. The bottom can fall out. If everything goes according to plan, obviously we saw what happened last year. He had a marvelous season, so somewhere in between. How much more valuable are point guards in 8-cat versus 9-cat? Roto in particular. After the first couple of rounds of best player available, would you consider point guards maybe a round early when turnovers are eliminated? Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty reasonable question. That's from Ben Lumsden. Point guards are sort of easier to accommodate in 8-cat. When you look at a punting tool, whatever website you might prefer to use it for, if you're punting, click the punt turnovers category or just set it on 8-cat or whatever. I think it's actually more indicative if you choose the punt button, because then you can actually see the kind of bump that everybody gets. And the guys that get a bump are the dudes that are turning the ball over more than 2 to 2.5 times per game. And most of them, not all of them, most of them are point guards and guards. And you can even sort by the biggest jumps when you turn off turnovers. Oddly enough, Boogie Cousins was number 1, and he's a center. But then you have James Harden and Russell Westbrook. Those guys are guards. LeBron James is everything. Joel Embiid, a center. John Wall, a guard. Kevin Durant, a forward. Steph, Devin Booker, Ben Simmons, Victor Oladipo. Giannis is in there. Of course, it's going to be all the guys that are premier usage dudes. And there are obviously other superstars that are not guards in that traditional respect. But really, as you get into like the guys who see a reasonable jump, but maybe not the biggest jump, then they're all guards. Okay, we talked about, we did the top, what was that, the top 12 just a minute ago? Top 12. The next 12 is still kind of a mishmash of guards and forwards. Marc Gasol and Andre Drummond slip in there. And then you get a run here. Beal, Donovan Mitchell, D'Angelo Russell, Kyrie, Chris Paul, Jeremy Lin, Dennis Schroeder, Ricky Rubio. These are the guys looking at last year. Kyle Lowry, Lonzo Ball, Jeff Teague, IT, Alfred Payton, Kemba, Dennis Smith Jr., Karl Anthony Towns, and Chris Middleton, by the way, are the only dudes that fall into that entire run of guards that get bumps from turning turnovers off. So the lesson to be learned from all this is that, yes, predominantly it's going to be guards, but at the very top of the list are basically just the first and second round guys anyway. They're the guys that are playing with the ball in their hands all stinking game long. So I would say you don't adjust your strategy much the first 2 rounds, but after that, yeah, then you start to look at guards a little bit more often. Because the centers and forwards that you hit to after that are guys that really aren't turning the ball over all that much. So their values are going to be largely unchanged. Whereas a guy that turned the ball over a ton but put up some decent numbers, and that is what sort of pushed them into the mid-rounds in 9-cat, they could actually get a bump up into the late early rounds in 8-cat. Hope that made sense. What are your thoughts on Karl Anthony Towns? And are you buying Andre Drummond's 3-pointers? 2 questions from same gentleman. Cat, I actually think he sees a slight dip this year. I think injuries catch up with him. You guys have heard me talk about my over-unders, my season win totals for Minnesota. I think Tom Thibodeau finally breaks them. So he's a very safe top 5 pick in fantasy because he's still quite durable even if he misses 5-6 games this year. And he's one of those rare centers that can contribute in basically every single statistical category in some sort of half-decent to very meaningful way. But he was never my number 1. Never had him up that way. Number 2, number 3, yeah, I think you could make a decent argument for that. And he's just a very safe top 5. Andre Drummond's 3-point addition. I desperately hope he's not actually doing that. I really hope that he's not adding the 3-pointer. I believe that the 3-pointer will hurt Andre Drummond. One of the best parts of owning Andre Drummond is that he's a big field goal percentage helper. He shot 53% on medium volume last year. I don't want that 53% coming down to 48 or 49 as he tries to hawk away from the 3-point line. It'll mess up his ability to rebound, keeps him away from the bucket. It'll mess up his ability to make easy buckets. It's the Blake Griffin effect, man. As these big guys add the 3, it usually messes them up. And I wanted to use a dirtier word than mess them up, but we're going to hold it together for this one. So pray that he's not, if you're a big Andre Drummond fan. Let's hope he stays close to the bucket. I got a question about ranking the entire second round. Not going to do that on today's show. Sorry about that, dude. Just that's too much. I have the 10th pick. This is from Lance. I have the 10th pick in a 10-man head-to-head 9-cat league. Okay, so last pick in a 10-team league. That's something we can work with. Who would you be targeting on the turn? Interesting. Kawhi or Jokic, maybe. Someone could fall in that territory. By the way, I don't think Jokic falls to you at 10. This is me just looking at ADPs, by the way. Forget even digging into my own stuff. Jokic has been going earlier than 10 in basically every draft I've been looking at. Guys that have gone closer to 10 have been dudes like Oladipo and Lillard and maybe Kawhi. And if you're there, I don't think I'm taking a chance on Kawhi. I think if you're not, this is just a strategic thing. It's not because I don't like Kawhi, because I've said on this show many times, I would love to end up with Kawhi towards the middle to end part of the second round. Problem here is, if you're on the turn here in a 10-team or a 12-team league, you have to make sure that you get two guys that are going to contribute in a good way all season long. You don't have the ability to risk blowing your second-round pick the way someone with Anthony Davis on their team might be able to blow a second-round pick. If you have Anthony Davis and you don't have a second-round pick, you're still going to be able to compete in your league because Anthony Davis is basically twice as valuable as most second-round guys. If you're sitting on Oladipo, who, by the way, had a wonderful season, but is not Anthony Davis, or Damian Lillard, who had a wonderful season, but isn't Anthony Davis, you can't afford to have a goose egg from your other guy right at that spot in the draft. You just can't. Anthony Davis, by the way, last year had twice the value for his team as Damian Lillard. Almost right on the nose. Twice the value. They both played about the same number of games. Twice the value. Same deal with Victor Oladipo. Basically twice the value. So that's what I'm talking about. You need both of those guys. Or whoever else might be sort of dangling around near the turn. Paul George probably is a guy that's relatively safe in that category. He's not as good as Oladipo or Damian Lillard, but guy you can sort of count on being there most of the season. What I'm telling you guys is that's not a spot to take chances. Unfortunately, and it's crummy. It's less fun. Taking chances is fun in a draft, but if you're on the turn, you can't afford to. You just can't. If you miss, you're done, and if you hit, it doesn't really guarantee that you're going to be in the top 3 or 4 anyway. Like, if you get Kawhi and he ends up as a top 7 guy, that's awesome. You put yourself in a really nice position to compete. But if you get Kawhi and he doesn't play for half the season, you're done. You're cooked, head-to-head or roto. You're just done. And I am someone who appreciates the joy of the nice, long fantasy season. I don't want to have my team eliminated in January. That sucks. Got a question about auction strategies. We'll try to book a show on that in the future for 2 reasons. Number one, I'm not a big auction guy, so we'll get an auction expert on here and we can pick his brain. Kind of like I've been doing with Adrian on Dynasty, like we were doing with Zach on analytics. We're going to be doing more of those, by the way, as we get into the early parts of the season, as his articles start coming out. And I use this as a segue, by the way, because Zach actually dropped a question into the mailbag this week. Why are I didn't, by the way, but I think this should be more of a broad-based thing. Why is Otto Porter getting a pass on the Dwight Howard effect? We saw what it did to Batum and Marvin Williams, plus we draft expecting Wall to play more than 41 games. Markieff Morris is healthy, and they added Austin Rivers. Just seems like counting stats may drop. You are absolutely right, Zach. He does not get a pass. The Yahoo projections give Otto Porter a big pass this year on the Dwight Howard effect. I do not. Here's the thing, though. The Dwight Howard effect is real. He pushes people away from the bucket. Otto Porter, a lot of his value is efficiency. That means he's going to need some good looks. Low turnovers, I don't think that'll change. He's a half-decent rebounder. That's going to get worse. There's going to be clogging up of the offense, so whatever shots he was able to get might start disappearing anyway. Remember, Otto Porter, he excelled last year when John Wall and his ball stopping were out of the lineup. Now you got Wall back, ball stopping. Bradley Beal, ball stopping. Dwight Howard, ball stopping. You have 3 guys in the starting lineup around Otto Porter that are just going to ball stop and keep him from getting good looks. So no, he definitely does not get a pass. But we're still seeing him fall into the mid to late 30s in a lot of 9-category leagues. And that, even with the Dwight Howard effect, is still probably a bit too low. The Yahoo projections have him at 13. That, to me, is way too high. So, no, I think you do have to ding Otto Porter. You ding Markieff Morris. You basically just ding everybody in Washington, with maybe the exception of Bradley Beal, since he wasn't really rebounding anyway. And a lot of his shots were jump shots anyway. A lot of Otto Porter's were as well. But he took his jump shots when he was wide open. Beal will take them basically anytime. So, no. Do not give Otto Porter a pass. In fact, look to the other side, by the way. I don't want to draft many Washington Wizards this year. I am hoping that I can get some values on some Charlotte players this year. Don't know where they're going to go, though. Fantasy Hoop Bomb says, what's the exact meaning of the word polarizing? Oh, that wasn't for the mailbag. That was because of yesterday's podcast about D'Angelo Russell. Is that a synonym for overrated? Nicely done, my good man. That's a gentleman who is apparently on my side of the D'Angelo Russell debate. Rob B. asks for an update on the Bespris bunch from last year. That I will give you. We've had the question on this season, who's the Bespris bunch for 2018-2019, and I don't have them yet, truth be told. Nico Mirotic and Thad Young were, of course, the guys that I was pushing hard last season, and I think most of you that ended up with them were largely pretty pleased with how things turned out. Obviously, Nico getting punched in the face turned what could have been an epic steal into a decent one. And then Thad Young was just good all year long, and you could basically get him in any draft you wanted. So the question now is about this year. Where do those guys fall? Well, their ADPs are obviously a lot higher than they were last season. Thad, I saw the ADP looking at Yahoo's numbers, was in the 90s. And I believe Nico, and I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe he's going more towards the 60s and 70s range. I mean, here's the thing, guys. You know I'm going to love these dudes forever. That's what it comes down to. I'm going to love these guys forever. And maybe a little bit of value. Not quite like there was last year. Durability, obviously, was one of the reasons we liked Thad so much. I've seen Thad Young slipping a little bit. He seems to be going the other direction. So his ADP might actually be dropping a tiny bit. There's never a belief that he can do it again, and he just keeps doing it again, over and over again. So yeah, probably a little bit more value there. I got to come up with a new Bespris bunch. Give me some time on that one. Give me some time. Next question from the mailbag. We're going to keep on floating through this thing. Daniel Ty says, drafting strategies regarding pairing types of players. I probably should have done that question back with the first grouping of questions related to how to shore up statistical categories in your draft. What are you doing early in the draft versus late in the draft? As I've said before, I'm generally looking for best player available. I don't always go center point guard. I don't always go point guard center. Sometimes there's a forward in the mix. I think it is good to try to get a couple of guys early in your draft that have sort of opposite successful categories, if only because early in the draft is when you can get guys that aren't going to hurt you in any category. So that's why it's easier to sort of balance your statistical mess, but you don't have to focus on it. I don't want you guys passing over 2 or 3 players to get to a guy that pairs better with your first-round guy. I'd rather you have a great first-round guy and a great second-round guy, because points are points, in Roto in particular, and in head-to-head, all you have to do is be good at more categories than the other guy. So don't over-focus on pairing types of players. I think it's good if it happens organically, and I think you do focus on it, as I said earlier, as you get to the 3rd, 4th round. You want to make sure that you haven't totally whiffed on anything, but you don't have to get a center in the 2nd round if you took a point guard in the 1st round, per se. Have you ever built the perfect team on Yahoo Mock Draft, then played some 2K and had to completely change your draft strategy? It's very funny. I like that. That's really good. The answer is no, because now that I have a toddler, I don't get to play video games at all. I have nothing. I have no time for video games. I loved it, man. I loved playing those basketball games when I was a younger man. My college roommates and I, we used to do player lock. Those of you that play the game, I don't know if that still exists in it, where I would just lock myself as the point guard. My roommates would lock themselves as the... it was like a wing and a center, and you didn't change who you controlled the entire game long. We took a Charlotte Bobcats team with Brevin Knight and Primoz Brezic and played all 82. It was awesome. But those were days gone by. One more topic for a future podcast, says Paper Vise. Tips on how to determine auction values for Dynasty. Okay, yeah, well, I suppose we can get into that a little bit at some point. Not sure exactly when we're going to be attacking these types of shows. This is a time of year where we really try to focus hard on the less niche stuff. Auction itself is obviously less niche, but auction for Dynasty is a little bit more nichey. From now until we get towards opening day, there is going to be a pretty hard focus on this podcast on mock draft results. As we start to figure out where everybody is actually getting drafted. We're going to have industry mock results. We're going to have traditional mock results. We're going to have hoop ball, forum mock results. There's all this good stuff to compare to one another. And then as you sort of compare that again to your own league, then you can figure out where you actually need to be taking guys. So that's a pretty important piece of the puzzle. I think you'd agree. That's the mailbag for today. If we didn't get to your questions, apologies. There were a ton of questions asked. Some of them were just too specific. Some of them were, like 8-player rank fests. We're just not going to do that right now because things change between now and opening day. It's just sort of not the right time for it. And as I said, bucket these guys. If you're looking to have somebody rank 8 centers, just put them in buckets. If you've got 3 of those 8 that you're like, I'm pretty sure these guys are my 3 best options, put those guys in your first bucket. Put the next 2 guys in the next bucket. Put the last 3 guys in the last one. That's how you should be looking for it. Figure out who you can take later. Do those mock drafts. See who's going earlier. And then you can plot out your strategy. Hey, maybe you've got your eye on, I forget who the centers were on this thing. It was a mid-round guy like a Steven Adams. If you're looking for a guy like Steven Adams and you're doing some mock drafts and you find that he's going wherever, then you can kind of game plan for it a little bit. Okay, I didn't get the center I wanted in the 4th round, but I think I can probably target Steven Adams because I have pick 73 or something like that. By the way, I have no idea if those numbers actually make sense. I didn't look at it, but that's what I'm talking about here. Put them in buckets. Put them in buckets. Coming up on tomorrow's podcast, Neil Rochlani, co-host with the Mo-host. We'll be talking about, his question from the mailbag. That was Neil. Head-to-head versus Roto. Strategy. Seems like people really wanted that question answered, so we're going to give it its own show. And then Friday, Neil and Adrian will wrap up the week. Can't believe it. More than halfway through the week already. The countdown continues, ladies and gentlemen. We are under 5 weeks from NBA opening night, and I can't freaking wait. I'm Dan Baspris. Thanks for all the questions, guys. Been a fun mailbag show. Try to get another one of these bad boys in before the season starts. Lot of stuff to cover. Between now and opening night, and we're going to get to it piece by individual piece. As I always say at the end of the show these days, do check out the draft guide. You will be happy you did. October 1st, the Brewski 150 in the draft guide. Buy it now before the price goes up, and you get that B150 at the nice, cheap rate of $13.99. Hoop-ball.com. That's where you can get it. At Hoopball Fantasy, at Hoopball Tweets if you want to go check them out. Oh, also wanted to mention, by the way, new Lakers cast out. Myself, Eli Bauman, Dr. Eric Noble put that bad boy out first thing this morning. Talking about Kawhi Leonard, Klay Thompson, Lou Aldeng's buyout, and, of course, some interesting news from Clutch Sports. If you're a Laker fan or you just like hearing 3 idiots talk about basketball, please go check that out. That is at Hoopball Lakers on Twitter. At Hoopball Lakers. It's the Hoopball Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Thanks again for the questions. We will talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.